I always believed love meant staying quiet. When my daughter asked for help paying for my grandson's birthday party, I agreed without hesitation. I didn't do it for recognition, I did it because that's what mothers do. But the message I received the night before the party shattered something inside me. She told me not to come, not because of space, not because of a mistake, but because her mother-in-law wanted to be the only grandmother there. I sat in silence, rereading the message, realizing how easily I had been erased. I didn't respond. I didn't argue. Instead, I made a decision rooted not in anger, but dignity. If I wasn't welcome, I wouldn't force myself in. But I also wouldn't disappear. What I arranged next wasn't a confrontation. It was a presence. And when the doors opened at that party, everything shifted. My name is Helen Whitmore. I am 69 years old and I have spent my life supporting my family quietly, often putting their happiness before my own. Raising my daughter alone after my husband passed, I learned to love through sacrifice, patience, and compromise. I've watched birthdays, graduations, and holidays pass, always helping from the background, never expecting recognition. My home was small, my energy worn, but my heart was full. Family was my purpose. And now, as my grandson's birthday approached, I felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. I wanted this day to be perfect for him. Little did I know, the very family I devoted myself to would try to erase me from it entirely. This realization, though not yet revealed, would change everything. Over the years, my bond with my grandson, Ethan, had become my greatest joy. From reading bedtime stories to helping with homework, I immersed myself in every small detail of his life. I celebrated his victories quietly, always proud, even when no one else noticed. My sacrifices went unnoticed, but I never minded. The laughter of his tiny voice and the way he hugged me tightly made every effort worthwhile. Each shared secret, every whispered wish, reminded me of why I endured so much. Yet beneath this quiet love was a lingering feeling that my presence was assumed, not cherished. I didn't complain. I believed love was enough, that effort alone was rewarded. I never guessed that my devotion might one day be challenged by those I trusted most. One evening, my daughter, Caroline, approached me with a wide smile, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Mom," she said, "Ethan's birthday is next week and I want it to be perfect. Can you help me with the party?" She explained every detail: balloons, cake, entertainment, decorations, but her tone carried urgency I didn't notice at first. I nodded immediately, offering my help without hesitation. The words "I can do it" felt natural, almost instinctive. I wanted my grandson to have the happiest birthday imaginable. Money, time, and effort were never considerations. It was love, nothing more. I didn't think twice about the cost because I wanted him to feel celebrated, adored, and cherished. I never imagined that the gesture meant more than generosity. It would become a test of respect and boundaries I wasn't ready for. By the next day, I had quietly arranged the funds, transferring $5,000 toward the party. It was a substantial amount, but I never calculated the weight of it. For me, this wasn't about money. It was about creating a memory, a moment of pure joy for Ethan. I envisioned the laughter, the cake, the decorations, and the excitement in his eyes. Every dollar felt like a gift wrapped in love. I didn't complain, negotiate, or expect gratitude. Helping family was instinct, a natural extension of who I was. As I finalized the payment, a small voice in my mind whispered caution, but I silenced it. I trusted my daughter completely, believing that love would guide her actions. Little did I know, my generosity would be met with a message that would shake my world and challenge everything I had believed about family. Once the payment was made, I stepped back to let Caroline organize the event. I called vendors, confirmed deliveries, and gave a few suggestions quietly, ensuring everything aligned with what Ethan would love. From a distance, I envisioned the party coming together perfectly: the colors, the balloons, the laughter, the excited chatter of children. I imagined myself watching Ethan's face light up as he saw the decorations, and it filled me with warmth. I didn't need the spotlight. I simply wanted to contribute, to ensure he had the happiest birthday. Yet even as I imagined joy, a creeping sense of unease grew in my chest. Something about the way plans were progressing felt different, unfamiliar. I pushed it aside, focusing on the love and intention behind my actions, unaware that the real test of patience and dignity was about to begin. The day before the party, subtle hints made me uneasy. Caroline's calls were shorter, her tone clipped. Messages from other family members mentioned grandmother, but never me. Still, I held on to hope, believing that love and effort would transcend petty rivalry. I reminded myself that my purpose was Ethan's happiness, not recognition. Quietly, I prepared small gifts and notes to leave in his room, ensuring my presence was felt even if physically absent. Despite the nagging exclusion, I refused to let bitterness take root. Hope and love guided me forward. I was determined to focus on the joy of the child, believing that even if overlooked by adults, My grandson's heart would remember the love behind every gesture. Then it arrived. The message I had dreaded without knowing it existed. Caroline's words were blunt, cold, and dismissive. Don't come. My mother-in-law wants to be the only grandmother there. I read it over and over, disbelief mixing with hurt. My hands trembled slightly, but I didn't respond. My first instinct to argue or plead was silenced by years of quiet wisdom. I understood immediately. This wasn't about logistics or love. It was about ego, control, and exclusion. For a moment, the room felt suffocating. And yet, beneath the sting of rejection, a seed of resolve began to grow. I would not be erased. I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't confront it. I would act, but differently, with strategy, dignity, and the quiet power of being underestimated. When I opened Caroline's text, the words hit me like ice water. Don't come. My mother-in-law wants to be the only grandmother there. I stared at the screen, disbelief freezing my thoughts. $5,000, weeks of planning, and every ounce of love I had poured into my grandson's celebration, dismissed in a few cold words. My hands shook slightly as I reread it, hoping context might soften the sting. But there was none. The exclusion was deliberate, calculated, and humiliating. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of being invisible, not to strangers, but to the family I had devoted my life to. And in that moment, the familiar safety of quiet obedience vanished, replaced by a simmering awareness that how I responded next would define the rest of the day. It didn't take long to see the truth. This wasn't about space or logistics, it was about ego. Caroline's mother-in-law wanted to be the star of the party, the only grandmother visible, leaving me relegated to the shadows. The realization burned sharply, mixing disappointment with disbelief. I thought of every sacrifice, every gift, every quiet effort unnoticed, and I felt a pang of anger I hadn't allowed myself to feel in decades. Years of being assumed, overlooked, and dismissed came rushing back. This message crystallized all of it. The family dynamic I had endured quietly was still intact, and I was still being undervalued. The sting of deliberate erasure cut deeper than any oversight ever could. Despite the hurt, I didn't respond. Anger or argument would only reinforce their control. I reminded myself that silence could be stronger than confrontation. Responding impulsively would have made me a participant in their drama. Instead, I sat quietly, allowing the emotions to settle and my thoughts to align. Choosing silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. I refused to give them satisfaction by begging for inclusion. I reminded myself that presence could be felt without being physically there. By staying calm, I retained control over my actions, rather than allowing emotion to dictate them. This quiet decision marked the beginning of a different kind of influence, a subtle power rooted not in confrontation, but in dignity and deliberate choice. As I processed the message, memories surfaced, years of being unintentionally pushed aside, forgotten at family gatherings, overlooked in celebrations. Every subtle slight, once dismissed as minor, now gained weight. The pattern was undeniable. I had spent decades supporting everyone, prioritizing their happiness, and yet my own presence was expendable when it came to recognition. I thought about the birthdays, holidays, and small victories where I was invisible, not because anyone wished to harm me, but because my love had always been taken for granted. Understanding this made the current message sting even more, but it also fueled clarity. It wasn't just about a party, it was about reclaiming respect. I knew then that my response had to be deliberate, purposeful, and impactful, reflecting not anger, but the quiet authority I had earned over a lifetime. Looking back, I could see the signs I had ignored. Every decision where my input was dismissed, every gathering where my efforts were invisible, every time my voice went unheard, they weren't random oversights. They were patterns, subtle but consistent, showing the dynamics of power within my family. I realized that my compliance had allowed these patterns to persist. Recognizing this, I felt a mix of sadness and determination. Sadness for the lost recognition, but determination to act differently this time. Patterns revealed not weakness, but opportunity to make choices that could shift influence without needing to fight directly. I understood now that my actions could speak louder than words, and that sometimes absence could carry a presence more powerful than attendance. I made a silent promise to myself. I would not plead, argue, or negotiate my way into acceptance. Begging would only validate their dismissal. Instead, I chose a path of subtle assertion. I would honor my love for my grandson while respecting my own dignity. This decision wasn't about revenge or humiliation, it was about self-respect. I understood that the power I had always overlooked, quiet influence, strategic action, and deliberate presence, could now be leveraged. By refusing to shrink or submit, I reclaimed control over my role. I would ensure my presence mattered without confrontation, and that the family dynamic would shift in ways they could not predict. This quiet strength became my armor. With clarity settling in, I began planning a response that would be unexpected yet impactful. I didn't need to appear in person. Instead, I would ensure my presence was felt without stepping into the room myself. I thought carefully about who could represent me, how subtle gestures could speak louder than words, and how to let dignity, not anger, lead the outcome. Every choice became deliberate, timing, placement, symbolism, all crafted to remind them that exclusion could not erase my influence. For the first time in decades, I felt empowered in silence. I wasn't just reacting, I was orchestrating a presence that would leave an impression far stronger than any confrontation could achieve. For the first time, I understood that being physically absent didn't mean being invisible. Presence could be felt in subtle ways, through gestures, messages, or a carefully chosen representative. I didn't need to step into the party myself to remind everyone that I mattered. This was liberating, yet daunting. The notion of exerting influence without being seen was unfamiliar, but I quickly realized it offered more control than confrontation ever could. My energy could shape perceptions while remaining untouched by the petty disputes unfolding. It wasn't about showing off or proving a point. It was about asserting dignity and reinforcing my role in the family in a quiet, strategic way. For once, absence became a tool of empowerment rather than exclusion. I thought carefully about who could embody my presence in a way that reflected love and subtle authority. It couldn't be just anyone. After deliberation, I selected Grace Turner, a close friend of the family, someone respected by everyone and quietly influential. Grace knew how to act with dignity and discretion, and she understood the nuances of our family dynamics. She wouldn't overstep or seek attention, yet her presence would carry weight. I explained my intentions to her, emphasizing the importance of subtlety and respect. Together, we planned how she would attend, what she would do, and how she would convey my love for Ethan without appearing confrontational. The trust I placed in her became the cornerstone of my strategy, giving me confidence that my absence would still leave a strong, undeniable impact. Grace and I mapped out exactly how the party would unfold. She would arrive at a critical moment, delivering gifts and messages from me at a time that maximized impact without being intrusive. Every detail was considered: timing, tone, and the sequence of actions that would subtly shift attention to the love and thought I had invested. The goal wasn't to embarrass anyone, but to assert my presence with elegance. I imagined the expressions of Caroline and her mother-in-law as they realized that my influence could be felt even in absence. We rehearsed the plan quietly, ensuring each gesture carried meaning. This careful orchestration transformed a moment of exclusion into an opportunity to demonstrate quiet power, reminding everyone that respect and thoughtfulness could outshine visibility and entitlement. Throughout the planning, I constantly reminded myself, dignity and respect must guide every action. This wasn't about revenge or humiliation. It was about showing love and presence without compromising my integrity. Grace's role had to convey warmth and care for Ethan while subtly affirming that his grandmother's influence couldn't be erased. We avoided anything ostentatious, loud, or manipulative. Every word, every smile, every gesture had to align with the truth of my intentions. This careful balance created tension in a positive way, forcing acknowledgement without conflict. I found unexpected satisfaction in this subtle authority. Respect could speak louder than confrontation, and I was determined that my absence would carry meaning beyond what anyone anticipated. Even with careful planning, I knew backlash was possible. Caroline might be offended. Her mother-in-law might be irritated. Guests could misinterpret the gesture. I braced myself emotionally for disappointment, frustration, or even anger. But I reminded myself that the outcome wasn't entirely in my control. My responsibility was the action itself, executed thoughtfully. Preparing emotionally meant releasing expectations, letting go of the desire for approval, and understanding that people react according to their own flaws, not my intentions. I meditated on patience and calm, visualizing the party unfolding exactly as planned while keeping my own heart steady. I had accepted that influence sometimes works quietly, and this required me to trust in the subtle power of thoughtful presence. Letting go of expectation became the hardest yet most liberating step. I refused to anticipate gratitude, recognition, or apology. Those were external variables beyond my control. Instead, I focused on the one thing I could influence: the love I sent through Grace and the thoughtfulness embedded in every gift and message. This shift in perspective lightened my emotional load. By releasing attachment to outcomes, I felt freedom for the first time in decades. I understood that my value didn't depend on acknowledgement. It existed independently. My contribution, my love, and my thoughtfulness mattered regardless of whether others noticed. This mindset transformed the act of being represented into a quiet triumph, one that would ripple through the party in subtle but undeniable ways. Finally, I fully accepted that I could not control reactions. What Caroline, her mother-in-law, or the guests thought or felt was irrelevant to the truth of my actions. I could only control how I acted, what I sent, and the love I imbued in every gesture. Accepting this brought peace, strength, and clarity. I let go of anxiety, fear, and the urge to intervene. Instead, I focused on the impact of intention, trusting that meaningful presence would be felt even if unnoticed. This acceptance shifted my energy from tension to calm, from anticipation to readiness. I was prepared, composed, and confident that when the moment arrived, my influence would manifest quietly yet unmistakably, leaving an impression that no one could erase. The morning arrived, and the party unfolded as if I didn't exist. Balloons were inflated, streamers hung perfectly, and Caroline bustled around, brimming with excitement. I stayed home, sitting quietly with a cup of tea, feeling a mix of anticipation and anxiety. The absence of my presence weighed heavily, but I reminded myself that this was intentional. My influence, my care, and my thoughtfulness weren't diminished simply because I wasn't physically there. From a distance, I watched via discreet updates, observing how everyone interacted. Every laugh, every cheer, and every glance felt amplified, as though the void I left created its own space. My absence had a strange weight, it was visible even when unseen. And I knew that when the right moment arrived, it would speak louder than any words. Guests trickled in, their voices filling the room with excitement. Children ran past, squealing in delight, and parents exchanged compliments about the decorations and the thoughtful planning. Caroline moved efficiently, receiving congratulations for orchestrating everything herself. The energy was vibrant, almost electric. Yet beneath the surface, subtle reactions indicated curiosity and anticipation. Questions about who helped with the party began to surface, whispered remarks hinting at recognition that hadn't reached anyone in particular. From my quiet observation, I realized my absence had created space for attention to settle elsewhere, making the room sensitive to any unexpected appearance. Each arrival built tension without knowing it, priming the family and guests for a shift that was about to make them rethink everything they assumed about the day. Then Grace entered. Calm, confident, and composed, she carried herself with elegance that demanded quiet attention. She brought gifts, personalized notes, and small gestures that conveyed warmth, thoughtfulness, and love in every detail. The room paused briefly as she moved from group to group, delivering messages and tokens from me. Some guests tilted their heads in curiosity, others whispered to one another, sensing an unusual presence. Caroline's face remained neutral at first, but I could see the subtle flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. Grace didn't announce me, she embodied me. Every action was deliberate, carefully measured, and impossible to ignore. In that instant, the narrative began to shift. The quiet influence I had cultivated from a distance was manifesting powerfully through her presence. As Grace moved through the room, the atmosphere changed. Conversations slowed, and attention subtly redirected toward the gestures and gifts she carried. Laughter continued, but with a different cadence, curiosity and respect woven through each interaction. Caroline and her mother-in-law, previously confident in controlling the narrative, now appeared subtly unsettled, their assumptions challenged without confrontation. The energy of the room was no longer dictated solely by presence or volume. It was guided by intention, elegance, and thoughtful influence. From my hidden vantage point, I felt a sense of quiet triumph. The power of absence had merged seamlessly with the deliberate presence of my representative, creating a tension and recognition that neither words nor actions alone could achieve. It was influenced without confrontation, subtle yet undeniable. Eyes widened slightly, brows furrowed, and whispers traveled across small clusters of guests. Caroline's smile faltered, her posture shifting as subtle doubts entered her mind. The mother-in-law, previously assured in dominance, exchanged glances that revealed surprise, perhaps even concern. Recognition rippled quietly through the room. This wasn't just any guest. Grace's gestures, the care in her tone, and the messages she delivered carried undeniable meaning. The weight of someone else orchestrating influence became evident. Each face told a story. Surprise, curiosity, and the dawning, understanding that absence had its own power. The careful planning I had undertaken from a distance had begun to manifest, leaving a mark on the day that no one had expected. My presence was unmistakably felt, even though I had not set foot in the room myself. Every action, every smile, every gift from Grace conveyed exactly what I intended, that I was there in spirit, love, and thoughtful intent, despite physical absence. Caroline and her mother-in-law felt it instantly. Guests began to comment, subtly asking who had arranged such personal touches, recognizing thought and effort that could not have come from them. The unspoken message was loud. Influence is not always about being present. Respect is earned through intention, care, and subtle guidance. I felt a swell of satisfaction knowing that my actions spoke louder than any argument ever could. My absence had become a statement in itself, and it landed more powerfully than confrontation could have achieved. The room now understood that exclusion could never erase presence. By the end of the event, it was clear. My absence had become the centerpiece. Every thoughtful gesture, every whispered question, every moment of curiosity reflected my deliberate influence. Caroline's initial confidence had softened, replaced by awareness. The mother-in-law's control over the narrative was disrupted, not through confrontation, but through subtle, undeniable presence executed with dignity. Guests, unaware of the underlying dynamics, experienced the elegance, care, and love that radiated from my representative. From my quiet vantage point, I realized that power often exists where it is least expected. Absence, when combined with intention, can resonate louder than any physical presence. And in that moment, I knew my message was clear. Love, dignity, and thoughtfulness are forces that cannot be erased, even when ignored. The story isn't over yet. Hit like and subscribe, because what happens next will leave you speechless. The party's aftermath was quiet but telling. Guests whispered among themselves, sharing observations about Grace's presence and the thoughtful gestures that had arrived on my behalf. Comments floated around the room, subtle acknowledgments of care and influence that could not be ignored. People who hadn't noticed my absence suddenly became aware of its weight. Caroline overheard some of these remarks and shifted in thought, realizing that the story of the party had evolved without her orchestrating it entirely. Even casual conversations carried traces of my influence, spreading organically. The energy had shifted. The room now acknowledged that thoughtful presence, whether visible or invisible, could create ripples far stronger than anyone had anticipated. My absence, paradoxically, had become a silent statement that resonated in ways my presence never could. Later that evening, Caroline retreated to a quiet corner, scrolling her phone, reading messages, and replaying moments from the party in her mind. I could almost see the hesitation in her expressions, the tiny cracks forming in the confidence she had displayed earlier. She questioned why certain gestures had left such a strong impression, why my influence had been felt even when I wasn't there. She didn't call me, she didn't text, but a sense of reflection began to take root. It wasn't confrontation, it was internal questioning. For the first time, she recognized that her decisions had consequences beyond control, and that excluding me hadn't erased my presence. Instead, it amplified it, creating a subtle realization that power sometimes lies in intention rather than visibility. The mother-in-law, previously confident in directing attention, felt the shift without fully understanding it. She tried to maintain authority over conversations and impressions, but the room's energy no longer aligned with her narrative. Subtle comments, glances, and appreciation for thoughtful gestures created a space she could not dominate. I hadn't interfered directly, yet her control slipped, quietly but unmistakably. Her confidence faltered as she noticed the focus moving away from her orchestrated image, replaced by a recognition of care, love, and intention. It was a gentle yet undeniable reversal. Influence doesn't always require confrontation. She was forced to reckon with the reality that orchestrated presence, done with thoughtfulness, could disrupt any attempt at controlling perception, leaving her scrambling to adjust without anyone having spoken my name. I made a conscious decision. I wouldn't defend, justify, or explain my absence. There was no need. The impact had already been felt. Words could dilute the subtle power of what had happened. Explanation might cheapen the statement my actions had made. Instead, I remained quietly observant, letting outcomes unfold naturally. Silence became my ally, dignity my armor. I understood that people draw their own conclusions when left to reflect, and that sometimes influence is stronger when not spoken aloud. I refused to engage in arguments or clarify intentions. My role had been asserted, my love delivered, and my presence felt. That was enough. I allowed the situation to speak for itself, confident that no additional commentary was necessary for recognition or understanding. After the event, I reflected on what had changed. My role within the family was no longer defined by compliance, invisibility, or quiet sacrifice alone. I had discovered that influence and presence could manifest in subtle ways that commanded respect without confrontation. I redefined my place, not as someone always behind the scenes, but as a woman whose care, thoughtfulness, and dignity carried weight regardless of recognition. Boundaries became clear in my mind, and I understood that participation did not require surrendering self-respect. This realization reshaped my future interactions. I would engage, contribute, and love, but on terms that honored my own value. I felt a newfound freedom, knowing that respect could not be demanded, it had to be naturally felt. I began setting boundaries subtly. I didn't announce them, I didn't argue, and I didn't seek acknowledgement. Decisions about involvement, attention, and contribution were made quietly but intentionally. I chose where to invest my energy and love, carefully considering the impact without needing external approval. My boundaries weren't punitive, they were protective, affirming my dignity and self-worth. Every interaction became a reflection of these choices: a measured presence, a thoughtful gesture, a subtle reminder that I could influence outcomes without asserting authority overtly. This quiet strategy shifted the dynamic, creating respect organically. People learned to navigate my space and time with more care, and I discovered that self-respect could wield power more profoundly than confrontation ever could. In the end, I felt a profound sense of peace. I realized that validation from others was fleeting, unreliable, and unnecessary. What mattered was self-respect, intentional action, and the quiet influence I could exert through thoughtfulness, dignity, and love. The party, the gestures, and the subtle shifts in family dynamics had reminded me that absence could speak volumes. I no longer measured worth by acknowledgement or attention. Instead, I embraced a calm certainty. My love mattered, my choices mattered, and I had the power to shape outcomes without needing permission. In that serenity, I discovered freedom, the kind that comes from acting with intention, caring without expectation, and knowing that presence, even when unseen, could leave an indelible mark.